Alright guys, in this video we are actually going to be talking about the new Rive workspace interface. The new Rive workspace looks something like this. All you just need to do is go ahead to create a new file. First screen you see is actually a screen where you can decide what you want in terms of preset you want, whether or not you actually want your file to be size of like an iPad or whatever. And then you could also set the width or the height manually. For this case, since I'm visually just trying to do this to show us an example, I'm just going to stick with the default settings within Rive. So I'm going to go ahead to create the artboard, and the next thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to explain every single panel that you can see within the Rive, permitting me to use the term workspace interface. All right, it's different from this workspace. Okay, it's different from the workspace that you have here, where you can create a new workspace. That's not what I'm talking about. Where work actually gets done, borrowing from Adobe Illustrator's terminology here. The first thing you actually see is like your title bar, and you have this Rive logo where it takes you to the home page, and you basically have any file you have opened, any file you're working actually opens up here, and you would see the title of each file at the top of the tab, almost like a browser. And then of course these tabs allow you to, when you double click, you can easily change the title of your file, right, without having to stress yourself. So I'm going to name this tutorial new. Then on the right you see the version of your Rive editor that you're actually currently using. Then on the right side you have the control buttons. That said, the next thing you have is actually your toolbar, and the toolbar is just like, what do we call it now? It's a collection of menus of tools, and then of course it also contains the file menu too. And that's not really like a collection of tools, but a collection of different actions that you can perform. So we're not going to get deep into the file menu in this tutorial. I just want to show you what it is. You have a bunch of options there, and we're going to have to examine them in future tutorials. But beside it, you have the select tools, and you have other tools, the artboard menu. um it contains similar uh, tools that are similar to the artboard, right? And of course components, then the drawing tools, right? Then the text tool, as well as the bone tools, then events, joystick, property group, all are lumped together in the same menu. Then you have scripting, and then you have the ability to play your state machine right on top of this. Now, whichever state machine is actually active is what gets to play. So let's say for instance, I have two state machines, and if I come here and say I want you to be selected, I mean selected, the moment I click on play, it's that state machine 2 that is actually going to be playing. Of course, whatever state machine is selected here is also automatically switch to like the default state machine, and you can change that by selecting the state machine you want to be default, which is anytime you press space or play, the state machine that automatically plays. Also, you can directly switch here by just right clicking on whichever state machine you have and set as default, which automatically plays it here as well. That said, on the right side of your toolbar, you have like an icon that shows you the users that are currently on your file. Then you have the opportunity to invite people, and you can invite people if you have the file that is, if the file is actually in a shared folder. For this tutorial, we're not going to be getting into all that. This is just to show you around. Then you have the option to publish to either a .riv file, or to library, or to embed URL, or to marketplace. Now, because I'm on Cadet, I don't have access to publish to library or to embed URL. You only have options to be able to do that when you're on Voyager or you're on enterprise. Then beside it is this button, this previewed bound values button. It's a very important one because there's what we call data binding within Rive. And I'm not going to really go in depth into that, but I'll just show you what this particular button actually does. So let's say for instance, as I have my ellipse, and let's say for instance I have a number controlling, I create a number, let me name it as scale, and I for instance come to this ellipse and say, okay, I want to change the scale, data bind this scale to this number scale that is on our view model, such that anytime I increase this number is also meant to also increase the x scale of this particular circle. Now notice that when I increase the number of the x scale, we notice there's nothing actually happening to our circle. There are two ways to do this to know what is happening to our circle. The first way is to go to our animate mode, where we have our state machine selected and we have to hit play, right? And then when we sorry so when I come to this view model and I have the number, I can just do that. However, there are lots of time where you just want to be able to check your work. Let's say for instance you've already done the data binding and you want to preview whether or not it's working as it should without necessarily having to play the state machine. All you need to do is click on this and it's going to give you access to preview data bound value, and already you can see that, yeah, that the size is already reflecting what we have in here. So when you do that, you notice that it's actually working, right? So but if it's off, you're not going to be able to do that. Notice it even switches off, right? When you it doesn't show, but it's affecting, but you can only see the effects when you preview data bound values or when you play your state machine. So I just added this part to the initial video because I actually skipped it, and hence why my face is not showing. Beside it is the design tab as well as the animate tab. You have two tabs in Rive, and these tabs are so important because knowing the difference between these two tabs can sometimes affect how your work is being done. For instance, you can make any changes whatsoever within the design phase. In fact, whatever it is you do in the design phase is going to be like the default. But if you come to the animate and let's say you are on a timeline and you move anything on your artboard, that is going to be recorded as a keyframe and it's going to affect whatever animation you want to make. The changes that happen here, depending, actually there's a little bit of nuance to that. The changes that you make within the animate sometimes don't affect the way things are in the design if you are within a timeline. But if you are on the state machine and you effect certain changes, it's actually going to be the same. It's going to be affected as a design tab. So as a rule of thumb, just do all your design within the design tab, and whenever you're ready to animate, come to the animate to effect changes in the timelines that you want. So if you want to make changes like permanent changes or like changes of the way things are meant to be, you have to do them within your design. And let me actually show you an example. This is not like, I don't know if, yeah, sure. So let's say for instance I have this, I'm in design mode now and I have this rectangle, and the moment I come to animate and I maybe come into a timeline and I'm going to move, notice that my object is now here towards the right, more towards the right than towards the left. Notice immediately I switch to my design tab, it goes back to the way it is. That's because whatever that change is not, it's not, I don't know what to call it, what word to call it. It's not like permanent. It's just a change that is temporary within um it's permanent, it's there, like it's just stored within the timeline. So if there's even another timeline it's going to restore back to the default I actually have within design. However, if I'm, if I have a state machine selected and I make that change is also going to be affected in the design, right? So depending on what you select when you animate, your your changes minor reflect globally, and I think that's something that is actually worthy of note. Sorry, all sort of sounds. Yeah. Alright, so in case you're wondering where you can learn Rive, we have a free Telegram channel. The link is going to be in the description of this video, so you can join in. We also hold bi-weekly fireside chats with industry experts to discuss industry standard practices to help boost your workflow and also help you find more clients. So if you're interested in that, click check the description of this video and you're going to have that. We also have a Rive animation boot camp that's currently going on. You can actually still sign up. There is going to be the link as well in the description. So let's get back to the video. All right, it's very important. The next set of what we have is actually the sidebar, and you have sidebar both in the home page as well as in your design workspace or workspace within Rive. And sidebar is actually like a combination of panels that you can move um up or down depending on what you want. And each panel has things you can do to them. You can click on the three dots to get the menu of each panel to get certain things that are doable with that particular panel. And that said, of course, for the hierarchy panel, it's very important to know that the hierarchy panel is content, it's artboard specific. So, whilst, I created a new artboard, here, um, I don't know, based on the way I recorded it, you will probably not say how I created it, but just to show that I can just go ahead to delete the artboard and come to select a new artboard and or select the artboard too and just create an artboard, right? So of course you can notice that within the hierarchy panel for this artboard, it's not showing me anything, right? But by the time I switch here, I can see that there's a rectangle. All right, so the hierarchy panel is not going to show you all the different um shapes that are within your artboard or assets that are within all of your artboards. It's only going to show you the files or the shapes or whatever what have you that are present within one artboard, right? So so that said, very important. And then brings us to one of the very important feature of many of the panels on the sidebar, which is the search tool. Allows you to quickly search by name. So let's say for instance you have a file where you're working on multiple, you have a lot of files, a lot of shapes, a lot of you know it could be a lot of uh, text or what have you, right? You can basically come to search and search by name to get, to quickly get to whatever file that you want to search for. Trust me, this can come in handy, particularly when you're working on projects. Now, the next set of options we have available that we can do for with our panels in the sidebar is this maximize or restore button. And so what the maximize does is basically just maximizes that particular panel and hides every other panel. So so basically you can do that if you want to maximize only one panel, and if that becomes bigger, then you can restore it. If I want the access panel to be the only one that everyone is saying, then definitely you can do that. All right, then the moment you maximize, all that stuff actually comes within to the bottom panel here, and you can basically select and toggle between which of the panels you actually want. So if we return it back, this can come in handy basically if you're working on a very large file and you want to see every single shape, so you can be able to make effect changes. So that's very important. Of course, on the hierarchy panel, we're going to get deep into that in future videos, but it's very important that you note that yeah, basically a couple of things you can do within your hierarchy panel, and those options are going to be show depending on which um I'm talking about the fact that you can basically right click on anything within your hierarchy panel to display a set of options. But we're not going to get into that because that's not what this tutorial is actually for. So one thing you can do within your hierarchy panel is to lock, isolate, or turn off or turn on the visibility of um of any any shape or object. So let's say for instance I'm going to switch back to this artboard and I have a circle, right? If I come to click on isolate, notice that I'm no longer seeing my rectangle, I'm only seeing the ellipse. It's very important. And if I turn off the visibility, I could turn off the visibility of my ellipse, which is going to make it not show, right? And on as much as we want. Then you also have the assets panel within the sidebar, and basically it contains every asset that you import into Rive. Now there are a couple of files that Rive doesn't support as it stands. Rive does not support MP4 files. It doesn't support GIFs. Um, it's only supports audio files, fonts, PNGs, SVGs, and I just hope I am naming them correctly. Just keep on plus. You would see the things that are all right. That didn't work correctly. I did it. I saw it somewhere. I really can't remember why. So that's just what it is. So these are just stuffs that you can upload. You can only upload sounds, fonts. You cannot upload EPS files. You cannot upload AI files. I don't mean AI files. I mean Adobe Illustrator files. All right. You know, I hope you get right. Of course, and also we have the data panel. The data panel is shows you every single asset. It shows you your view model and some set of things that are associated with the view model, like converters, enums, library components, and of course you can create a folder as well. Now, it's very important to note that so that's it. Data is one of like the most important feature for Rive, and in the coming videos, we are actually going to be taking a deep dive into the different set of the different things that we can do with data binding within Rive. So we're just going to leave that out for this particular tutorial because we are not trying to look at anything in depth. We're just basically trying to have an overview of the Rive interface as it stands in September 2026. Now, the next panel that we have is our animations panel, and this actually shows us, the timelines of whatever state machines that we have actually created. So in this timeline, you can actually create a state machine or a timeline or a folder. Now, I think that folders are not available to be created, for people who are on the free Rive account. So if you want to have access to folders, you need to consider subscribing to the gated version. Right. So that said, we have of course the agent. Pardon me, agent. All right, so the pardon me thing. Okay. All right, so basically, it's with the agents that you can, prompt, and you can get things done. The agent has access to everything within Rive. It can basically help you create files, create shapes, what have you. It's like it's something else. All right, so you can try it out, and it's actually absolutely free now, with some, yeah, and it's absolutely free now for everybody to experiment with. And then you could bring in your, you can connect your uh the agents with whatever, other agents that you might be using outside of Rive. I'm not going to get into that because I've not been tinkering with the Rive AI agent a lot. For me, I've been more tending towards what I could do more with Rive, um, aside of the AI agent. All right, so let's move forward. On our right is actually the stage. This is, or the editor. This is where all the work that we are doing within Rive actually shows. And the editor could have, you could have multiple, you could split the editor to multiple panels. And this is what I mean. So let's say, for instance, want um you want to be able to work here, and then you want to be automatically, like, able to switch. You can basically split the stages, and on this one you can do something else. So you can come here and then come here. Not only that, you can switch. So let's say, for instance, you have a script here. You can, basically be, working on your scripts whilst you are actually seeing the effects of whatever you've done in your in your you know artboard. Then, of course, also you can, yeah, so that's basically that. If you click the three dot icon, it will show you what, the things that are possible with the tabs. And of course, you can keep splitting as much as you like to get whatever results you want. Of course, if you want to close the tabs, you can basically just close the tab by clicking on this X um, button that is beside each tab. Right. Of course, you can switch, you can maximize, so, and then you can restore if you want, only your scripts to be full screen. And there are lots of times where you might want to do this. If you're into scripting, sometimes you just want to see everything about your code and you want to see it properly, right? So this actually comes in handy when it comes to that. So that said, we have actually looked at the editor. And one thing that I believe is very important when it comes to the editor, okay, I think I have actually spoken about that. Then underneath the editor, we have the debug panel. So the debug panel just shows us, gives us a bunch of panels or tabs, where we have the console tab, the problems tab, the changes to testing the audio, and this status bar, which is basically shows us, how long it takes, to compile our code. Now the console panel is where you basically like print. It shows you like the result of your code, and you can use it to track, where, there are problems within your code, etc. The problems tab just shows you all the problems. And um I think, I'm not too sure now, but I think the changes tab, I've really not paid attention to the changes tab. Um, but um, I think it should just do what it does. So I'm not going to be going through some of all these tabs. I just want to show you like they exist, and so you can become familiar with them. So let's say for instance you have anything, you've done anything and you have different things written in your console, you can definitely close or clear the control consoles, and you won't have anything within this place. But that's actually for another set of tutorial. Like when we're talking about scripting, we get into that. Now on our right side is actually, well, it's very similar to our properties tab in Adobe Illustrator. So it's basically like a contextual bar that actually shows us different things, different properties of different shapes or objects or assets that is actually being selected within Rive. So notice that when I have a converter script selected, it shows me that, oh, this is information, and these are certain properties of this particular asset. Now, if I come to our stage and I select a rectangle, notice that it's showing me a bunch of different options, including the align tools, layout selection, the end slice selection, and a couple of other tools as well. So, the properties tab, I'm just using my own terminology here. I think according to Rive, they called it the inspector panel, right? If I'm correct, so they call it the inspector panel. So, whatever works for you, as long as you get um the what it does. So that's it. So the inspector panel actually allows you to do to make changes, to depending on it just shows you like the things that are possible within every single any single object or asset that you select. So that brings us to like the end of the Rive workspace overview. And if you happen to like you know learned one thing or two, you can actually let me know in the comments. Also, you can ask specific questions, or maybe things you feel like I actually left out. Leave them in the comments, and we are actually going to address them in coming videos. That said, thank you so much for watching this tutorial. See you on the next one.